You'll notice how bare this is, yeah? And that's purposeful. That's how we feel when we're in the midst of loss and grief. There's a barrenness. And I am ashamed, actually, to say that it took until now, as we say, right? I was 40 years old until I realized, right? So it took me into adulthood to realize the roots of this Memorial Day celebration, or Memorial Day remembrance that our country does every year. So it actually has roots in the African American community post-Civil War. So in Charleston, South Carolina, there was a prisoner of war camp for Union soldiers at an old racetrack. That was horrible. Like, it was horrible. Starvation, deprivation. It was a really, really notorious prisoner of war camp. And as the Confederate Army fled, as the Union soldiers approached, 257 Union soldiers died due to that deprivation, due to starvation. And they were buried by the Confederate soldiers in a mass grave. And then the soldiers moved on. A week later, the newly freed, enslaved people of Charleston, South Carolina, went out to that mass grave. And they disinterred is the correct word. They disinterred all of those bodies. And they planted each one, it gets me every time, they planted each one in a separate grave. And they created a cemetery out of what had been just land. They created a cemetery, and they put a sign over it that said, "Martyrs of the Racetrack," because it had been a racetrack at the time. And a little while later, so first off, I want you to just imagine what courage that took. Really think about the courage that was involved in that act. You're still in what is the Confederate South, even though they have lost. And you are going and you are caring for the bodies of Union soldiers. In May of the next year, 10,000 freed, enslaved people, children, churches, it was organized by the churches, marched through Charleston. Again, think of the courage. Marched through Charleston and had a parade. Does that sound familiar? And they led back to that cemetery where they sang hymns and they sang songs. Does that sound familiar? And they laid flowers and they decorated the graves of those 257 Union soldiers. And that is our actual first Memorial Day service, parade day. And back then they called it Decorating Day, because they would decorate the graves in honor and in remembrance. It isn't until the 1960s that it became a national holiday that became known as Memorial Day. There is so much forgotten history. So much forgotten history. And as the choir's gonna sing in a moment, and they're gonna be singing a song from Harriet, which is based on the music of the time. So it's a song that has hidden messages for slaves embedded in it, and it's about how do we survive this and what's coming next. And as I was looking for pictures to go with the slideshow that's gonna play while they're singing, it was really hard to find images that reflected the Black experience of grief. So we're gonna start with some images from the Civil War, and I want you to just think of those soldiers, the faces of those soldiers who were willing to give their life for their freedom as well as our own. And they were able to stand up against something. And then the slideshow's gonna open up to encompass all who have lost someone who has given their life for our country, for the wholeness of our country, and for the values that we believe in.